Hello and welcome to CEC Online Lectures. In this lecture, I will continue my discussion on the basic tools for argument. There is a phrase which is often associated with Sherlock Holmes, which he uses while explaining his reasoning in solving a crime to his bemused companion, Dr. Watson. And that is, it is elementary, Watson. The deduction is obvious. Now, deduction always means valid inferences. So, no deduction or deductive argument can be invalid, but an argument can be deductively invalid. In fact, all non-deductions are invalid arguments or deductively invalid arguments, so that deductive in deductively invalid is redundant. So you can see it is time to add a few more tools in our logic toolbox, and these are validity, soundness, invalidity, and consistency. Let us start with validity. We encounter this word quite frequently in our everyday speech. We hear people commenting, "You have a valid point," "Your objection is valid," or "There is no valid reason for this," and so on. But I wish to tell you, in philosophical discourses, the word valid is used solely for the evaluation of arguments, not of propositions or statements. A valid argument is one in which the conclusion necessarily follows from the premises. And as I just mentioned in the beginning, a genuine deduction is a valid argument. In fact, validity is a characteristic of a rigorous deductive argument. But if we do not understand it properly, we may land up in an awkward situation. I will tell you why. Considering that a deductive argument has a certain form, if that form is strictly adhered to, we will definitely arrive at a validly inferred conclusion. Let us, for example, take the deductive argument, all fathers are gentlemen. Amitabh Bachchan is a father. Therefore, Amitabh Bachchan is a gentleman. So the form of this deductive argument is all F are G, A is an F, therefore A is a G. This is an example of perfect deduction, so of course it is valid. Now let us try to determine what happens if we substitute F, G and A with something else. And when we do that, we get this. All fathers are gentlemen. Madhuri Dixit is a father. Therefore, Madhuri Dixit is a gentleman. Now, since this argument has the same deductive form as the one discussed before, which is a valid deductive argument, this too has to be valid. The thing is, as far as validity of an argument is concerned, only the form of the argument matters. The content and the truth of the propositions making up the argument are irrelevant. So it really doesn't matter what F, G and A are substituted with. The form is enough to tell us that the argument is valid. The notion of validity is not content sensitive. We only have to keep in mind, if the premises are true, the conclusion must also be true. Although we know that here one premise is false, as Madhuri Dixit is not a father, and the conclusion is also false, as Madhuri Dixit is not a gentleman. But as I said in the previous lecture, the word if plays the key role. If the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. And there are many alternative ways to understand what a valid argument is. These are: number one, an argument is valid if all the premises can't be true without the conclusion also being true. 2. An argument is valid if the truth of all its premises forces the conclusion to be true. Number 3. An argument is valid if it would be inconsistent for all its premises to be true and its conclusion to be false. Number 4. An argument is valid if its conclusion follows with certainty from its premises. 5. An argument is valid if no counterexample to it can be constructed. That is, a possible situation that makes all the premises true and the conclusion false. Now it is time to discuss other cases of validity. An argument with a genuine deductive form will surely employ a valid inference. The case of valid arguments where all the premises are true is called a sound argument. Sound arguments are a combination of validity as well as true premises, which of course lead to a true conclusion. So in a sound argument, there is no chance of failing as we derive a true conclusion from all true premises. The conclusion, by all means, must be accepted because not only is it derived deductively from the premises, but is also true. Sound arguments then are a species of valid arguments, the desirable species. So for a sound argument to the definition of a valid argument, which says if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true, we add that all the premises are in fact true. What this means is that being valid is not the sole criterion of soundness. The argument must also have true premises. So, an advice to you. Do not just accept arguments because they are valid, but accept them when they are sound, because valid arguments can be either sound or unsound. Since valid arguments can have one or more premises as false and a false conclusion, or even a silly premise and a ridiculous conclusion. For example, look at the argument. All ingredients in this recipe are more than 7 feet tall. Carrot is an ingredient in this recipe. Therefore, carrot is more than 7 feet tall. In this example, the premise is not just false but also silly, and the conclusion is again not just false but ridiculous. Yet, the argument is valid. So, you must note that validity is a necessary but not sufficient criterion of a sound argument, because we cannot have a sound argument without it being valid. The other cases of validity include where we have one or more false premise leading to a true conclusion, and one or more false premise leading to a false conclusion. You may not make true claims in your premises, but because of the deductive form of the argument, validity is ensured. This species of valid arguments are hence called unsound arguments. We lump all unsound arguments together and do not distinguish among arguments where some or all premises are false. We can simply say that a valid argument in which at least one premise is false is unsound. We need not say anything about the conclusion. In logic proper, the distinction between sound and unsound arguments is insignificant. Logicians are only concerned with the word therefore, that is, whether the inference is valid or not. They are concerned only with the form of the argument and not with the content of the premises, whether they are true or false or silly or ridiculous. It matters not an iota to them. However, I am introducing logic here to you not with the intention of making you logicians, though it would be nice if some of you became logicians, as we need good new logicians, especially from the birthplace of mathematics. But I am introducing logic to you so that you can employ it in various disciplines and in ordinary day-to-day conversation for good and sound reasoning. Now the distinction between sound and unsound arguments becomes significant. Consider the argument. If Arun Jaitley is the finance minister in 2020, then Arun Jaitley presented the budget for 2020. Arun Jaitley is the finance minister in 2020, Therefore, Arun Jaitley presented the budget for 2020. Though valid, it is clearly an unsound argument, as the second premise is clearly false and so is the conclusion false. Whereas the argument, if Nirmala Sitharaman is the finance minister in 2020, then Nirmala Sitharaman presented the budget for 2020. Nirmala Sitharaman is the finance minister in 2020, therefore Nirmala Sitharaman presented the budget for 2020. And this argument is not only valid but also sound because all the premises are true and so is the conclusion true as well. Consider another argument. If no one is violent, there will be peace in the world. No one is violent, therefore there is peace in the world. As childish and hopelessly optimistic this argument may appear, nonetheless, such arguments have a place in normal thought process. The argument is obviously unsound because the second premise is false, and so is the conclusion. But if the second premise were true, then the conclusion would also be true, as long as the first premise is true. Some may debate the truth of the first premise. In any case, it is visual thinking which is necessary for good mental health. We all know that validity is an absolutely necessary logical tool which we must acquire to master the art of argument and critical thinking. Let me end this section on validity with a warning that in a given argument, if all the premises are true and the conclusion is also true, there is no guarantee that it is a valid argument. Consider this one. All Manipuris are Asians. All Indians are Asians. Therefore, all Manipuris are Indians. Clearly, all the premises as well as the conclusion here are true. But this argument is not valid. Why? Because the form of this argument is not a valid argument form. Now, what is the form of this argument? It is all F are G, all H are G, therefore all F are H. It is easy to prove this argument is invalid by constructing a counterexample. This we do by making different substitutions for F, G and H, and what we get is this. All Manipuris are Asians, all Japanese are Asians, therefore all Manipuris are Japanese. We have successfully constructed a counterexample because both the premises are true but the conclusion is false. We were easily able to construct a counterexample by substituting Japanese instead of Indians for the predicate H. We now move to the discussion on invalidity. From what we have gathered so far, it becomes easy for us to define invalidity or an invalid argument. It is one in which the truth of the premise does not guarantee the truth of the conclusion. So in an invalid argument, if the premises are true, the conclusion may very well be false. But let me tell you, it is not easy to identify an invalid argument. And again, let me emphasize that it is not an argument that is invalid, but an argument form, which the argument exemplifies that is invalid, so that we call the particular argument invalid. So, it is important to remain alert while evaluating any argument. Let us assess this argument. Wild animals do not live in cities. Leopards do not live in cities. Therefore, leopards are wild animals. At first glance, we do not see any problem in this argument. This is because the premises and conclusion are all true. So, it may appear as a sure shot case of not just validity but soundness. I hope you remember that an argument form is valid so long as the truth of the premises guarantees the truth of the conclusion. But is it really so in the above mentioned argument form? The answer is no, because an animal may not live in the city, yet be not wild. We can very well imagine or even witness animals which are not wild and still do not live in the cities. Moreover, it is not unthinkable. So, the claim that leopards do not live in the cities, together with the premise that wild animals do not live in cities, does not guarantee that leopards are wild animals, although in fact they are. You can see the form of this argument. All F are G, all H are G, therefore all H are F. Now we can understand the invalidity of the argument by further analyzing it. So we substitute the predicate variables F, G and H with some terms so that we get all presidents of India are Indian nationals, all players in the Indian cricket team are Indian nationals, therefore all players in the Indian cricket team are presidents of India. Now, here both the premises are true, but the conclusion is false. So this is not the deductive argument form we are looking for. It is clearly an invalid argument form. What have we done here? We have proved the invalidity by constructing a counterexample. Since the argument form is invalid, our leopard's argument is invalid. I had said earlier, it is not easy to determine the invalidity of an argument. This is because in invalid arguments, we can have all the possibilities. Number one or more premise is false and the conclusion is false. 2, one or more premise is false and the conclusion is true. 3, all the premises are true and the conclusion is also true. 4, all the premises are true, but the conclusion is false. Whereas in a valid argument, fourth possibility is not a possibility at all. So we can easily get deceived when we see all true premises and a true conclusion and declare the argument to be valid, when the form of the argument is actually invalid, as we have just seen. But if we are not hasty but patient and careful, determining invalidity is not so difficult. So it is not important to just make true claims. What is even more important is that those claims must be set in good arguments. Now we can discuss consistency. Consistency is the backbone of rational argumentation, for it consists in understanding your own beliefs. All your beliefs must cohere and fit with each other, because when you present an argument or debate with someone on an issue, you cannot and must not assert two things at the same time. None of your statement emerging from your belief system should contradict the other. You cannot, while in an argument, say that any proposition P is true and P is not true, because that will be a philosophical offense and you will be charged with inconsistency. And then it is understood that you are no more in the debate. Consistent propositions are always true together, and inconsistent statements cannot be true at the same time. Suppose a person makes a statement, killing people is always wrong, and later he adds another statement, killing someone in self-defense is not wrong. Is it not a case of logical inconsistency? It is, because the second statement is contradicting the first statement. However, this case would not have been charged with inconsistency if the first statement of the speaker had been, killing people is usually wrong. Outside philosophy, we may give relief to people uttering inconsistent statements because we do get to hear something like, I'm here and I'm not here. I love rain and I don't love rain. You know, these are very well taken in poetry. But what about the world is and the world is not? Now this sounds philosophical. So logic demands that we need to understand the context in which the statements are made. So can we say that consistency is a foolproof condition for the success of an argument or the truth of any theory? I don't think so, but it definitely is a requirement. Now let us come to another important tool called definitions. Suppose you are participating in a debate where you have to present your views on secularism. Now, what is the first thing you need to equip yourself with so that you can make a convincing impact on your arguments, with your arguments? It is the definition of secularism. Definitions form the core of philosophy. If we do not have definitions, then things will be so messed up. There will be no resolution of disputes and disagreements. You know that sometimes the disagreements are because of the ambiguity in our language. So we need precise definitions to counter that situation. However, definitions can be precise if they are neither too narrow nor too broad. So if one defines human as a bearded, male, two-legged animal, then we know that there is a problem with this definition. It is too narrow as it excludes many who deserve to be called human. Now, another person attempts to give a definition and says that a human is a mammal. Now, this definition too is problematic as it is too broad, as there are many creatures like cows and monkeys besides humans which are mammals. Now, you must be wondering what exactly the definition of human is. This is the task I'm giving you. Find it out, research it. So, a precise definition is one which applies only to cases where it is appropriate. Otherwise, it will lead to faulty and misleading conclusions. This much for today. Stay safe. Thank you.